disinformation and election integrity. These resolutions give us a shared continental framework to defend rights, to promote transparency, and address emerging digital threats. But our task now is to move from principles to practice, to clarify outstanding issues, to build consensus, and find practical ways to implement these commitments at national and regional levels. We have an excellent panel to guide this discussion. You will first hear a brief recap from the Special Rapporteur on freedom of expression and access to information from the African Commission for Human and People's Rights, Commissioner Topsy Suno, followed by focus inputs from our panelists, and then reflections from our partner at UNESCO. May we start with a video?
Access to information with the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. As you are all aware, the Commission does 3 resolutions, namely Resolution 620, Resolution 630, and Resolution 631 last year. And these relate to data. Resolution 620 is on access to data. Resolution 630 is on platform accountability and fact-checking. Resolution 631 is on public service content. The Commission has mandated me for these 3 resolutions to draw guidelines, and this is why we're coming to you for you to give your inputs so that guidelines can be drawn. For Resolution 620, I'm supported by African Alliance on Access to Data. For Resolution 630, I'm supported by Media Monitoring Africa and UNESCO. For Resolution 631, I'm supported by SOS Support Public Broadcasting Coalition. So Resolution 620 is about promoting and harnessing data access as a tool for advancing human rights and sustainable development in the digital age. Resolution 630 is about assisting states to monitor technology companies in respect of their duty to maintain information integrity through independent fact-checking. And Resolution 631 is about working towards the assessment of public interest content in this digital era and developing guidelines to ensure public interest element for all platforms operating in Africa. The Commission has also passed Resolution 639 in July 2025, mandating me to update the model law on access to information to incorporate the digital aspect, so that in fact whatever comes out of these 3 resolutions, that is 620, 630 and 631, will feed in greatly for the Resolution 639 on updating the model law on access to information. I therefore urge you all to give all your inputs for these 3 resolutions, and so that we can draw up guidelines which will be helpful for all African states and Africa as a whole.
Thank you very much. Our panelists will be afforded 10 minutes each to make presentations on the individual resolutions, and also share with you how you can still make input. As I said, we want this to be as inclusive as possible. So now I'm going to call on Hlengiwe Dube to tackle Resolution 620 and outstanding issues and points of consensus. She is the Program Manager for Expression, Information and Digital Rights at the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria. Hlengiwe?
Thank you, Zoe. And thank you so much, colleagues, for attending. Thank you for your time. I'm going to quickly present on the Resolution 620 adopted by the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. And this resolution is on access to data. So just before the adoption of the resolution itself, Zoe indicated that there's an African Alliance on Access to Data. This is a network of stakeholders that have been promoting access to data across the continent in collaboration with the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression and Access to Information in Africa. And last year, in 2024, during the International Day for Universal Access to Information in Accra, the Alliance presented a statement as part of the commemorative activities there. And, that statement was also a stakeholder statement as well. And the aim was to elevate access to data and situate access to data within the context of human rights and sustainable development on the continent, and acknowledge some of the challenges that we face on the continent as far as access to data is concerned, including recognizing the shortage of access to data, including a recognition on the scarcity of professional skills around data management in Africa and the need to strengthen local capacity as well, and also to recognize some of the challenges that are faced by vulnerable and marginalized groups when it comes to meaningfully engaging with data on the continent. There was also an emphasis on equity in data access, and specifically looking at marginalized communities, including rural communities, low income or vulnerable populations. And the recommendations around that was that no one should be left behind, and there were calls for action. So essentially the statement was pushing for a paradigm that access to data is not just about technical or an economic issue, but it's fundamentally a human rights issue, like I've indicated. It's also very integral to transparency, it's integral to accountability, governance, democracy, and development. And the statement situated access to data is essential to achieving and monitoring sustainable development goals. So when you're working on sustainable development goals, think about access to data, how it's important in that context. So following that statement or that momentum, the African Commission went on to adopt the resolution on access to data. And the resolution recognizes that in the digital age that we live in, data is important for advancing what I've already stated: democracy, sustainable development, transparency, public participation, and all that. And it also acknowledges opportunities and risks in that context, that whilst we can leverage on data and benefit from it in so many ways, including in policy making, there are also certain risks that we should acknowledge, such as risks related to privacy, risks related to discrimination, unequal access, and data misuse, among other risks that we can mention. The resolution is also situated in relation to earlier instruments that have already been adopted by the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. These include the Model Law on Access to Information,
Support Public Broadcasting Coalition, a member-based civil society organization based in South Africa. The coalition is dedicated to the promotion and advancement of public service media and access to public service content in the public interest to strengthen democracy. Uyanda has a PowerPoint presentation. Will you assist with that, please?
Good afternoon, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Uyanda Siotula. I am with the SOS Support Public Broadcasting Coalition. Thank you very much once again for being part of our session. We really appreciate it. So before I go into the rep session, Zoe, I'd like to start with the presentation and I can drop the bars a little bit later into my conversation. And I must say, I'm happy that I'm not the last, because whenever people introduce you and you are the last speaker and they say last but not least, I'm never really sure, if they mean it. But without waste of time, Resolution 631 looks at universal access to public service content in the online environment. So similar to the previous resolutions, we are supporting the African Commission on Human Rights, on Human and People's Rights. And all of these consultations are taking place under the auspices of the Special Rapporteur. For Resolution 631, the Special Rapporteur is supported by SOS as well as UNESCO. And the mandate for Resolution 631 is to consult various African players to assess the concept of public service content in the digital age, and to then develop guidelines for member states that can assist them in developing future-focused policy frameworks for universal access to public service content. So unlike the previous resolutions, I feel like I have a little bit more work to do, because the concept of public service content isn't often spoken about, but when you're speaking about tech, platform accountability, access to data, these are conversations that we're often having. So if you can just bear with me so that I can explain to you what this resolution is about. So the focus is on the extension of the production, the distribution, as well as the accessibility of public service content. So we know that public service media is the traditional carrier of public service content, but this resolution looks at extending the production of public service content beyond what is already available on public service media. So it recognizes the rise of online companies, within our African spaces that provide a range of content to various African communities. It also recognizes that these online services are not regulated to uphold they're not regulated to meet public interest benchmarks. And when we're talking about those benchmarks, we're looking at factual news, we're looking at information around election, credible information that's related to elections. We're looking at youth services, information that is in our various local languages, so that it's easy for people, even in rural areas and underserved communities, to understand the information. So it also recognizes that digital platforms are increasingly used by various communities as sources of access to information. And also, we know that in our age, a lot of times, social media is the primary source of information for many people, for people to stay updated, understand what's happening in the world or around them. They quickly go on social media and get an update. So it also recognizes that digital platforms are increasingly used as sources Okay, so I've already spoken about that. It also recognizes the importance of access to a variety of public service content, as well as the policy gap, and the need to overhaul our policy frameworks to ensure that they are fit for purpose in the digital age. So I've already spoken about, the historical aspect of public service media being the primary carriers of public service content. So what becomes a problem, it's not that public service media has failed, but what becomes a problem is that public service media has got limited digital footprint on these digital platforms. And that absence then, allows or enables, mis and disinformation to spread because there isn't a credible voice, in those spaces. So that also allows sensational content, mis and disinformation, to spread on these platforms. And this resolution also recognizes, that it is not enough to hold platforms accountable through, takedown notices. Yes, that mechanism is effective, but it's not enough because when these takedown notices are being initiated, there needs to be an alternative that platforms are being pointed to as information that they need to prioritize and promote in order to support democracy. So this is viewed as an effective mechanism to counter mis and disinformation, especially in the spaces where it actually does spiral. So another aspect of this resolution, and this is something that in our consultations people have been bringing up to say, public service content as the ultimate alternative needs to be embedded in in the algorithms, discoverability systems to ensure that it is promoted effectively. And we also need to start thinking about how to counter the norm of having sensational information go viral and prioritizing public interest information instead. But that also means there's a conversation that needs to be held with platforms to prioritize, public interest over commercial gain. So again, in the digital age, public service content, and I think this is the reality. So someone might ask, why are we even thinking about, changing or formalizing the production of public service content when we've got public service media? The reality is that it is already happening. We have a wide range of content producers that are producing public service content, but because it is not defined as public service content, then it gets lost. So then, in the digital age, public service content is already being produced by a wider range of actors, and this includes social media influencers, people with podcasts, various content creators, and even influencers. There's also been instances where even some radio stations or television stations would actually partner with influencers because they already have the following, they already have a credible voice within their followers. So that's one way of going about it. But again, the other issue is that these influencers and new content creators are shaping the flow of information. They're becoming, the platform for public debate. When we look at what's trending on social media, they've also formulated or positioned themselves as opinion leaders, in various spaces. So it is important that, that framework or that existing framework is then adopted into a more formal, mechanism of producing public service content in the digital age. So it can no longer be the responsibility of public service broadcasters to produce public service content, especially because we mentioned earlier that they don't have the digital footprint. And this wider ecosystem of producers is really, really important because it also enables mis and disinformation being countered at a much faster rate, but also within a much bigger scale, because they already have, social media or digital visibility. Okay, so what Resolution 631 seeks to do is to develop a policy framework for access to public service content in the digital age. To increase exposure to credible information, accurate, news and information, as well as diverse content that is in, various diverse languages. Especially, we know in Africa, Africa is a very diverse continent, with diverse cultures, and, everybody that's on social media or everybody that's a content creator, they represent a certain group that, can then, relate to whatever content is being produced by them. So, it's about capitalizing on those existing mechanisms. Okay, this is the last slide. So why, before the timekeeper calls me to order, so why is public service content important? It is important because public service content is information that people need to participate meaningfully in their various democracies in their own countries. I mentioned earlier, that's factual news, educational programming, youth services, diverse cultural expressions, which is very important as well, and fair election coverage. So again, access to public service content is not a luxury. It is, a way of protecting and promoting, a democratic right. Because every individual has a right to be informed, especially if you look at, the electoral period. It is very important that people are informed about the different political parties, who to vote for, what are the manifestos saying, what are the, who are these people, and what are they promising, and so that they make an informed decision about who to vote for. And that can only be unpacked and access through public service content that is verifiable. So without public service content, citizens are left vulnerable to mis and disinformation, which distorts public debate. And then universal access to public service content is very important in the digital age because it advances information integrity, which I think, as digital experts that are in the room obviously know that it is the goal that we are slowly working towards. So again, I would like to also encourage you to please scan the QR code and contribute to Resolution 631. So once you scan the QR code, you'll find a form that has got various questions about public service content, because we really want to hear from you. We are not experts in the digital space, but you are, and you know exactly where the gaps are and how this particular resolution can be enriched to really benefit us as communities within Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Uyanda. I've always watched very closely how our friends and comrades in South Africa really developed a coalition, very, very strong coalition around public service broadcasting, and can actually speak to an actual public service broadcaster and ideally how it operates. For most of us on the continent, the notion of public service broadcasting is, it's still not something that we experience. So I think we need to really interrogate these terms very, very seriously and ensure that it also reflects our realities. So now I'm going to ask John Otieno Okande from UNESCO to share some remarks. John didn't indicate how I should introduce him, aside from the fact that he's from UNESCO and he is supporting this process and is very committed to its success. John.
Thank you, Zoe. Good afternoon. The good thing of doing a respondent's remarks is, they've said everything. And you just pick up a few things and sort of just give perspective to one or two things. We are glad to be supporting this process, and thanks to CIPESA for inviting us, and Zoe, whom I first knew her when I joined UNESCO, I think 13 plus years ago, and finally I'm in your motherland. But it's an honor to be here, and we are glad that ultimately Africa is thinking about these crucial things that we constantly discuss in very good meetings like this, and we pack them in nice reports, and then it remains there. And from UNESCO side, we're actually delighted with the fact that we're seeing coalitions coming together and critically unpacking some of these issues that are actually among the key mandates of our line of work at UNESCO. And a few reflections on data access and how this aligns with information integrity and also literacy. We are glad that Commissioner Topsy and team actually came up with this resolution because we see it explicitly framing how equitable access to data should be, one as a human right essential for development and informed society. And we see this as an actual response to how Africa has been the playing field, for example, for big tech, and the inequalities that are coming up with that. Why does this matter for us collectively here? Because we believe that this resolution is a major step in helping us harness the power of data to advance human rights, sustainable development across our continent. And the good thing with this is also it will help address some of the unequal access to data issues, what the Africa Alliance are working on, and also provide a network of the different stakeholders to be able to come up with approaches to unlock that data, which is, I don't know if it's the new oil or it's oil. And from UNESCO side, we are glad to be supporting this process because it explicitly links with our work on access to information. We recently launched the data governance framework just a few weeks ago, and also our media information literacy work, where it's important just beyond the basic literacies. We're now seeing different actors doing data literacy, AI literacy, among others. And we are calling on you to actually be part of this process so that you can inform these instruments. Because I know the process is by November, there has to be something. In February, they need to be discussed at AU level during a full meeting. So it's an opportunity for you to share your insights to this process. On platform accountability, response is basically, why does this matter? Because we are seeing the developments in the global north. There's always an interesting adage because within UNESCO we also we have a program called Social Media for Peace and one on platform governance. Profits go north, harms come south. And I think this resolution provides us with a good mechanism for us to actually dialogue with platforms and see what is that win-win mechanism for Africa, defined by Africa. We see this resolution as a direct response to some of the issues that we are seeing. Within our context, of course, I don't know how Namibia is or some of the Southern Africa countries, but where I come from Kenya, there is what we call regulatory dissonance, whereby you create different regulatory bodies and give them an element to work with, but not allowing them to come together, have a convergence when they want to hold platforms accountable. I believe maybe that is also mirrored in different contexts, but we believe this resolution would actually provide some framework through the guidelines that are being developed to provide that level playing field. How can we discuss this and how can we ensure that what we are seeing happening, like cutting down on fact-checking and other measures, X not having presence within a context, among others, and not just looking at global tech, the big tech, also local tech, because we know in some jurisdictions, small platforms, we call them local tech, are used for certain businesses, surveillance, among others. So the same principles that are being defined, I believe, also mirrors how local tech should also espouse the key principles we are talking about: human rights, inclusivity, among other values. And this directly aligns with some of our novel work around platform governance. A few years ago, we launched the global guidelines for governance of platforms. It aligns with our FOE and ATI work, the Windhoek Declaration, among others. So we believe this would be a great mechanism for us to continue with the good work we are doing. On public service content, I believe this explicitly links with one, journalism, and also digital governance. And for this resolution, it provides sort of a safeguard on universal access to quality public interest content. And this will help us affirm the Africa milestone like the Windhoek +30 Declaration on Information as a Public Good. And we believe this is a necessary call to action against algorithm that prioritize some of the key things that we've been discussing during this conference. Why does this really matter, and your engagement in this process? The resolution is crucial because it addresses the threat to public service content and community broadcasters from new and unregulated online platforms. I believe we've seen, I can't call it death, but the decline in public broadcasting in most of our countries, be it the economic models that we used to have. And I believe this is a time that this resolution can give us that impetus to start discussing some of the issues around public service content. We know about platforms and data issues, hindering or jeopardizing viability of broadcasters and also delivery of content in African languages to vulnerable communities. And we believe your engagement through this process and in helping develop these guidelines will help us to have frameworks that are unique, that are context specific, and for grounds the continent's needs and safeguarding the diversity of African voices. All these elements, we are glad that ACHPR, the Commissioner Topsy and others came up with this. And we are supporting our colleagues working hand in hand, and we are calling on you also to join us and ensure that we have very good guidelines because it has to be reflective of our views, the issues that we are dealing with in our different organizations. And that is the end of my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John. Okay, this is what? Okay, there we go. Thank you very much, John. You started the process, but I think we still have some homework to do because I don't think that we've made it clear enough for you at least, certainly not for me. I still have to wrap my head around it, just how these resolutions complement each other, connecting the dots to really take what I think would be an ecosystem-wide approach to the crafting and then hopefully adopting and implementation of these resolutions. So I'm just going to ask one question and ask our panelists to respond, and then I'm going to give you the opportunity to ask your questions. I am sure you're very, very excited to pose very intriguing questions. So all I want to know is from our panelists is now that we are in this process, so what? What is the next step? How and what kind of coalitions do we need to ensure that we go from developing as we have done before beautiful resolutions that are not implemented and are poorly understood and is not taken up by those who most need to see these rights realized. Anyway.
How many minutes? How many minutes? Thank you so much, Zoe. So for the resolutions that have been adopted, I think we have outlined the processes that the way the African Commission works is that there has to be extensive consultation so that there's also public ownership of the normative standards that the African Commission develops, and that can only be achieved when there is public participation. And this happens before the drafting of the normative standards and during, and also after the instruments have been adopted. There's also a lot of work that goes into it, into raising awareness, and thinking about implementation as well, because at the end of the day, you don't want to just adopt a resolution or a set of guidelines or a normative standards. You are also actively thinking about how it's going to be useful. For instance, when these instruments are being drafted or these guidelines are being drafted, you think of who is going to make use of these instruments. How are they going to benefit the public? And they are also framed in they're adopted by a human rights institution. They are also framed in a human rights based language or discourse. Also think about how it contributes to our human rights as well. So there has to be that extensive consultation. That's why we're having these sessions calling on, we don't want to have a situation where you have the same people, that are talking to each other, drafting the guidelines and all that. It has to be as extensive as possible. And that's why I was mentioning also that, we need those that work in different sectors. Think about what, in my case, access to data means for socio-economic rights. What does it mean in the context of democracy? What does it mean in the different layers? But another, what we need also is what I always say, that if you look at the instruments of the African Commission, the recognition of the role of the state. But what we've seen in most cases is that there is not much participation of the state when it comes to drafting or developing these normative standards, which I think is very important. And we've seen it before in the other guidelines, in other declarations and all that. But again, unfortunately, we are seeing it also happening that we have not received enough support from state parties. But at the end of the day, they are the duty bearer. They are an important stakeholder when it comes to whether the framing of it, but also the implementation of it. So that's a missing stakeholder in the process. If we probably can find a way of bringing the states to the table, not just after the Commission has developed the guidelines, but during the process of developing the guidelines, such as these ones.
Thank you, Zoe. So for Resolution 630, we're still in the middle of consultation. Let's try this again. I'm trying to do what you were doing. What am I doing wrong? There we go. I'm sorry, I apologize about that. So as I was saying, for Resolution 630, we're still, the consultations are ongoing. We are hoping to start the drafting process by the end of this year, have it validated, which will then call back some experts to help us validate the guidelines, the draft guidelines that would have been developed. And then during the World Press Freedom Day, before that, the guidelines should have been adopted or at least presented to the African Commission. And then during World Press Freedom Day, the process concludes. But we have a bit of time between now and, concluding the consultations. And this is why we keep on emphasizing that people need to participate. But to answer one of your questions, how do they connect the resolutions? So for us, you cannot talk about safeguarding information integrity without factoring in access to data. That's resolution 620. You can't talk about information integrity without also factoring in public service content, because these issues are all interlinked. And I must mention that in June this year, I stand to be corrected, but Resolution 639 was adopted, again mandating the Special Rapporteur to develop guidelines that will look at reworking the model law on access to information in Africa. So all of the guidelines of the resolutions that we're talking about today will feed into that model law, that's Resolution 639. So they are all interconnected. I know that, in some of the sessions that I've attended, there's been the concern that we adopt a lot of resolutions and then the implementation is a problem. And so we should no longer adopt resolutions. But for me, that shouldn't be the case, because the environment keeps evolving. The issues that we had, for instance, in 2013, when the model law on access to information was adopted, the issues then differ in some way from the issues to the issues that we are encountering now. And there will be different issues that we'll be encountering maybe 5-10 years from now. And so the idea is that when we are developing the resolutions that we're discussing now, we should be thinking or looking forward, so that we don't just work at addressing the issues that we're facing now, but also look forward and anticipating new challenges, taking into consideration the evolving landscape. And I know that there's a lot of adoption that happens at AU level. Our leaders, they're very good at making adoptions and making promises, but when it comes to implementation, there are a lot of gaps. And I should mention that adoption at that level, at AU level, doesn't automatically translate into rights-based national practice. And this is why we keep on emphasizing that there should be human rights safeguards, for instance, when we are developing the guidelines, or even just when we are discussing the work that we're doing. Human rights or the rights-based approaches should come forward and even, be dominant to the approaches or strategies that we are trying to develop. So those are my 2 cents.
Thank you very much. We can take a few questions now. We don't have much time. Chris, you want to go first? Mike.
Thanks, Zoe. Fortunately, I'm going to be polemical at this hour and maybe cause people not to sleep well. But I just want to say that Resolution 631 is an act of cowardice. It's a cop-out. Whether we are fatigued by anything relating to public service broadcasting, and we then bring in all this thing about public service content because of this illusion of the diversity and plurality of the media. And then we bring in this reliance on good behavior in the context of market failure, that influencers, podcasters, somehow we're going to bring them into some ethical frameworks in which they'll do good in the information ecosystem. We can address factual information via ethical frameworks, critical literacies, a whole lot of instruments that we do have. What we cannot and will not do is to surrender public broadcasting infrastructure and what we have developed to date about what public broadcasting is to political thugs in government. Leave them with everything and say, well, we shall now rely on this whole ecosystem, to create content that we can promote and all that. That cannot be. So 631 for me does not make sense it needs to be revisited, and I shall be writing to whoever is relevant, on that. But this is my sentiment. Thank you.
Thank you, Christiana.
Thank you for those thoughts.
Then we'll do the round with the panelists.
Okay, this is just some kind of, for me, the optics. There are 3 organizations represented here, very South African-centric. Feels like there was a special audience with the special rapporteur. That's one. But it was just pointed out that there are links, and they're all interconnected. And I just feel we're so I looked at the ACHPR resolutions page. We're saturated with resolutions. The other thing is we talk about weak implementation. Part of the struggle that we have with our governments is that when they do sort of domesticate, one of the things is that on paper, we've done a lot of progress. And of course, the issue is, the deficit is in the implementation. And the reason often given is resources. So we're giving them more resolutions, all kind of interlinked, and then we're kind of, my question is, so what? You know.
And then Alfred.
Hello, okay. Let me appreciate the work that we've done so far. Yeah, whether we should not have a resolution or whether we should have, it's a different thing, but let's have something on ground first for us to debate, which is exactly what we are doing right now. But let me just quickly draw our attention to 4 things. One, we should be cognizant of African right to development, a declaration which has been so contentious even at the UN, because that is the pathway for us to have a voice as Africa. I don't have time to delve into that. Then again, I look at this resolution. One of the problems we are likely going to have is states, state autonomy, country sovereignty when it comes to actualization, because we can't just lord it over everybody. It's a resolution, so we still have to work with each country to see how they can adapt and adopt this, even though we should have an African framework. Then the third one I talk about is that we should learn, in trying to have access to data policy, we should learn from access to information legislation. And so I was just going through that now, and I saw that even some countries in Africa don't even have it. And then those who have it, they've not fully complied to it. So if you're having problem with access to information, then what happened to access to data? So I think for us to develop this resolution very well, we should go and do a kind of, luckily, there's been a comparative analysis already. So you go and look at success stories and lessons learned from access to information so it can help in access to data. And lastly, the 3 resolutions, I see a commonality, and that is the digital sphere now. The basis of contention is this algorithm transparency and auditing. And for me, that is where we should go to first, where information are prioritized, and the information are prioritized are not driving the real content. There should be a resolution on this global tech, on auditing the algorithm. They must be transparent with that algorithm. Let us know which kind of data did they use to train the algorithm, and what kind of data is the algorithm collecting, and for what purpose, and what is the basis of that algorithm. Without that basis, that resolution, there will still be maneuver one way or the other. Thank you so much. Let me stop here.
Thank you, Alfred.
Yeah, it's like asking the question to myself. 2 weeks ago, we had a discussion with some access to information commissioners in our region, West Africa. And some of them were like hesitating about another like guidelines on access to data or reforms that are envisioned in their countries about the access to information law to integrate access to data. It was really a very hot discussion, and they wanted like to have assurance that by focusing on access to data, we are not creating a situation where, allow me the term, I'm not good in English, where traditional access to traditional information will be put at the second level, and the focus will be now data. And they were asking, if this has to happen, should our countries establish new commissions on access to data, or they have to strengthen our commissions on access to information that are already not enoughly supported? So there were all these discussions we had, not like persuasive answers, and I want also from your background to hear how you approach this discussion better to feed our own engagement with these stakeholders. Thank you.
Uyana, do you want to start?
Yes, so thank you very much for that very heartfelt input. So I think I need to make it clear that Resolution 631 does not seek to replace public service broadcasting. We can all agree that public broadcasting is prominent. It has been a source of information for many, across Africa, and still remains a very powerful tool of communication. But we cannot ignore, the fact that the media and the digital landscape is changing, how information is distributed. It's changing information consumption patterns. And it's also changing, where and when people access information. So if we look at the initial transformation, we need to look at how we essentially moved from traditional broadcasting to linear, from linear to non-linear, because that was also to ensure that people are able to reach information at a time that is suitable for them. So this, I think this resolution takes from that foundation to say, yes, public service content is important, and it is being traditionally produced by public service broadcasters, but in this current age, the players are there. They are, like I said earlier, that they are the opinion leaders. They already have the following, so it doesn't replace, but what it does is that it broadens the production of that particular public service content. So, I understand your concerns. Perhaps we can have a conversation after that. After this panel, but it's not a replacement. It's broadening and ensuring that the frameworks that digital media is bringing forth are used to enhance access to credible content, because the risk is that if they don't produce public service content, then there's the alternative of sensational information, but bottom line is information will be produced. So it's a matter of taking advantage of that particular mechanism and using it to advance credible information, or the production of credible information rather. So I think also it's not a new aspect. If you look at, especially in South Africa, if you look at maybe also in how I explained it, I focused on content creators. But if you look at the broadcasting sphere itself, you've got commercial broadcasters that are mandated, especially in South Africa, regulated to carry a certain quotient of public service content. You've got community broadcasters as well with the same obligation. So, so seeing how that has been very effective in South Africa to ensure that within the broadcasting framework, there is assurance of access to credible content that helps improve the lives of individuals. So it really takes from that to say we can't have information that does not meet public interest obligations. Somehow these new content creators need to really be part of the broader production system of credible content. Yeah, I think let's have a conversation afterwards. But I did want earlier on, Zoe, to just give my thoughts on the question that you had asked. I think for coalitions, that are effective, I think the key is not to impose, to have consultations, as Hlengiwe said, but not to impose, because what we see is, we would develop resolutions and then we impose them on governments, we impose them on stakeholders. So these conversations need to include, governments, tech platforms from the onset, so that, there's also, during the conversations, ways to explore feasibility of some of the provisions, that are being incorporated into those guidelines.
Thank you. Lisa, you wanted to say something? Very, very briefly, please. And then, did you want to add, John, Hlengiwe, or shall we then take another round? Okay, let Lester respond.
So there's a lot of experts in the room. There's there's some concerns that are coming in, and these are legit concerns. I cannot respond to the concern around why, South Africa or Southern Africa centered, but the fact that we are working with we're working with the African Commission, for me, it signals that we are not just in Southern Africa, but also the fact that we have the support of UNESCO also shows that we're not just, we might be from Southern Africa, but our work is not just in Southern Africa. And this is why we are having these consultations across, across African states. Alfred talked about the information integrity conference that just happened in Cape Verde, where we had, and we did have a consultation there with regulators. And some of the issues that we're talking about, some of the issues we're talking about here came out from there, including the fact that the regulators themselves want capacity building. So we are having consultations tomorrow at Bramsberg. I could have pronounced it wrong, but it's just across the room. And we hope that the experts that are in the room will come to our sessions and contribute or share their input, especially the concerns that are coming out from here. So around 10 or 11, just check your program, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights consultations. There are 2 of them. Please come and share these views, because clearly there are a lot of things that should go into the guidelines that we are not experts on, and we would not, if we were doing this process alone, we would not, reflect them adequately. So please, I invite everybody.
Thank you so much. So briefly, the complaint about the optics. So you get a situation where the African Commission on Human and People's Rights adopts a resolution, and the resolution just lies idle. There's nothing being done about it. There is no capacity within the African Commission to act on the resolution, and there are no resources. And then you have civil society organizations that have an interest in that resolution, that they take up the responsibility to support the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. This could have been any organization anyway. It could have been supported by an organization from any part of the continent. So the resolution that I was talking about, the access to data one, it's the Coalition on Access to Data, which is not a South African organization at all. It has stakeholder representation from across the continent. Alfred, who is seated here, is a member of the Alliance. Gilbert, next to him from East Africa, is a member. Dad from Nigeria. So it's stakeholders from across the continent. We even have from North Africa, academics, civil society organizations, so many elements that form that. Unfortunately, I happen to be based at the Center for Human Rights University of Pretoria in South Africa, having taken up the call or the request to come and do this presentation. Otherwise, the presentation could have been done by Gilbert. It could have been done by Alfred. In the context of the information integrity, Media Monitoring Africa took it upon themselves to assist the Special Rapporteur in developing what the resolution mandated the Commission to do, because there's no capacity, that's the reality. There's very, very limited capacity at the African Commission. So I also encourage anyone here that if you see that the Commission has adopted a particular resolution and there's work around it that needs to be done, reach out to the commissioner involved or the commissioner leading that process and do the work. There is no favoritism or whatsoever. It's about you taking up the space and reaching out to the Commission. The Commission is a body mandated by the African Union to push the human rights agenda and supporting everybody and everyone on the continent. But I also appreciate the comments on access to data. Maybe I'll come and consult more. I think that will be useful to the guidelines.
Thank you. I am going to release you from this room. It's very late in the day. Thank you so much for deciding to spend this time with us. Just for information purposes, there are 2 consultations tomorrow. Please check the agenda. There is a consultation on the agenda. It just says ACHPR consultation. So the first consultation is between 8:30 and 10 o'clock. That one will deal specifically with resolution 620. And then there's one later in the day that will deal with resolution 630 and 631. So note that on your programs, please, and take advantage of that opportunity to make your inputs. Thank you very much. Thank you to my panelists. Have a great rest of the day.